So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Martin Skancke. I'm chair of the PRI. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be here at what's the opening session of the Academic Network Conference. So when I joined the PRI as chair 3.5 years ago, one of the things I said when I sat down with the PRI executive was that we really should try to bring the academic world and the practitioners closer together. We had academic network conferences for some time, but in earlier days it used to be separate events to make sure that there was minimum interaction between academics and practitioners. We had them in different places, different time. And I said, no, that has to stop. That has to end. We need to bring them together and have parallel sessions and more integrated sessions. Now we have these as twin events, essentially. And I think that reaffirms the commitment that we have to bringing the academics and the practitioners closer together. And I think that is one of the things that, at least for me as chair, is important. And I know we've had some discussions on how we best can organize this between the PRI and our academic, how we can get maximum value also based on what the PRI is doing. But I don't think that discussion should detract from the fact that for us at the PRI, the academic network and the academic work that is done is of central importance. We now have close to 4,000 academics in this network, so it's a huge global network of academics working in this field. I'm very excited about a new development, which is we will launch shortly, I think in a few weeks, a new online platform for interaction between academics and practitioners to bring these communities even closer together and to make sure that there is a good exchange of views on these issues. The work that's been done on these issues is of real practical value. It's of practical value to the PRI as an organization and of practical value to our signatories. So I'm pleased we have on the panel Alexander, since we're in Germany, I should call him Herr Professor Dr. Alexander Bassen, who is from the University of Hamburg, but also chairing the Academic Network Advisory Committee. So one of the very useful pieces of research that's been done that I really use a lot personally in my interaction with signatories is the big meta-study that was done with you and some colleagues and with the support of Deutsche Asset Management and in cooperation with the PRI, trying to draw out insights from, I think, 2,000 studies on ESG and how it relates to financial performance that's done over 2 or 3 decades. I spend a lot of time meeting not just signatories, but also potential signatories. And I'm talking to them about, well, what are the main obstacles for you in joining the PRI and in implementing responsible investing? And very many of them say, well, actually, I'm very interested, but my board thinks that this will cost us money, and I need some good arguments for why ESG integration is positive and not negative in terms of your investment results. And I say to them, well, you're in luck because I have the answers you're looking for. I have this fantastic study that's done by the clever people at the University of Hamburg. So this has been, and so I really reference this a lot and use it. Last year we had a call for research on success factors of engagement on ESG issues. And we're presenting the findings of this tomorrow. I've had a sneak preview. So it's, I'm really excited about this. I think not just does it demonstrate the value of engagement, but it gives concrete findings as to how we should best organize engagements to make them efficient and effective. So this is of real practical value to our signatories. It shows them how they can organize engagements to have maximum impact. So I think there is a lot to be learned from this kind of cooperation, the way that we organize these networks. I think for the practitioners, it has a great value to have access to an academic community who has the opportunity to sometimes take a step back and look at the bigger picture, to look at time series, look at the data, and draw out some findings that sometimes it's difficult to see because as a practitioner you're a bit nearsighted and you're caught up in the demands of your daytime job. But I think also for the academics, it is rewarding, useful to have access to practitioners with lots of the data that you need for the research, but also I think rewarding to see that the work that you've been spending a lot of time on is put to practical use. So I really believe in the synergies of bringing these groups together. So I'm very, very happy that we can organize this as a twin event, and I hope that in the going forward that we can get even more benefits out of this cooperation between the PRI and its academic network. And of course, running it all from the side of the PRI is Katherine, who is doing a fantastic job, and she will now chair this session. So I'll leave it in her capable hands. But I hope that you enjoy not just this session, but also the rest of the conference and all the events tomorrow. So thank you, and enjoy the conference.
Thanks very much, Martin. This is indeed the first session of the Academic Network Conference and being twinned with PRI in person. This morning we heard about economic inequality. How can investors respond, and why should they in the first place? This is work that we are doing with Harvard's Kennedy School, and Martin mentioned the work from our first call for research with Cass Business School and Judge Business School. The work that we're doing seeks to bring together academics and investors, and the power of dialogue, engagement, and coming together is crucial for us and why we're here right now. I'm so pleased to see many of you here in the room and to hear about the latest RI insights. And on the panel with me today, we have Professor Alexander Bassen from the University of Hamburg, Jean-Philippe Desmartin, who is the head of RI at Edmond de Rothschild, and Christel Dumas, assistant professor at ICHEC, Brussels Management School. And so now I will hand over to Alexander, who will be sharing the process and insights and recommendations of how we got to this point, the call for papers that PRI issued for the most outstanding research, the 3 different categories, and all the great work that you've been doing in the network.
Yeah, thank you, Katherine. Thanks for the warm welcome. It's kind of difficult to summarize the empirical findings of academics within 10 to 15 minutes at 5:30, and you're all looking forward to the party tonight. Well, at least the academics will have a party tonight. Sorry for that. Yes, I would just briefly describe what we did in this for this award, the PRI Award, and I would just describe the findings of the 3 outstanding papers that received this award. We had a very, very straightforward process for that. That means the academics, they submitted their papers. We had approximately 60 submissions for the award. And we had different criteria to evaluate these papers, always double-blind process. That means the reviewers, they do not know which paper they're going to review, who are the authors. The criteria are practical significance. What Martin just said, well, it's important to see if the academic work has an impact for practitioners. Of course, from an academic perspective, it's also important to see if there's a contribution to responsible investment research. We said it should be an original paper, so it should have a new idea. That was also one of our criteria. And of course, from a methodological perspective, it should be a very straightforward paper. So based on that, we had 2 rounds. The first one was just to review all these approximately 60 papers with 2 reviewers, and then we had a short list for the award. We will present most of these, the work tomorrow in the academic conference in different tracks. And I would like to summarize the findings of these 3 awards, and you will also see the awardees later in person when they're standing there and getting their the award. I would like to start with the student award. We had 3 different categories: student award, quantitative paper, and qualitative paper, because it's very difficult to compare the work of students with the one of senior academics, and also from a methodological perspective, it makes sense to separate between quantitative and qualitative papers because they have different approaches, and therefore we think these 3 categories we also used in the years before were really helpful. So I would like to start with the paper that will receive the student award. It's a paper of Ian Robertson of the University of Oxford. The title is Responsible Investment Requires the Proxy Voting System Responsive to Retail Investors. So the interesting thing is what we did in the last sessions here, we talked a lot about engagement of institutional investors, but there was no really a focus on what are retail investors really doing. And what Ian did was that he analyzed from an historical perspective the voting behavior of retail investors that have their own stocks in their own portfolio. And in the 1970s, he realized in the US that approximately 80% of the retail investors use their voting rights. And now, I mean, this is the situation we have to face. We have less than 10% of the retail investors really using their voting rights. That means from a theoretical perspective, it's quite interesting to see that institutional investors incorporate ESG issues in their voting policy, in their proxy voting policy, which is very common. But for the retail investor, we can see that there is a decline over the last 40 years. The reasons are obvious. I mean, the portfolios of retail investors are diversified, so the transaction costs are very high to execute the votings. And we can see that the engagement of institutional investor is getting more professional, so therefore it might make sense that we have such a development. But I think you pointed out what I think very interesting point, that it's also linked to a disconnection to the capitalism. And you described different stage of political development. And you pointed out that it is a result, or it is linked to the findings we just described, that there is a disconnection between the ownership's right and the understanding of capitalism in the society. So therefore, you said, well, we should think about this, the proxy voting as a proxy for the understanding of the political system and also the link to the political system. And your idea is to point recommendations how we can make capitalism more attractive to the society again, and what kind of possibilities the regulator will have in that field. These are the findings in a nutshell. You can see the historical development, proxy voting of retail investors, and also political implications of this process we saw in the last couple of years, in the last couple of decades. So the idea of this session is, this is something you mentioned already, we'll have the possibility for Q&As later, so that means all the candidates will be on the stage and you can address your questions directly, because it's of course much better if they answer the question to the papers instead of me, who only can give you a brief summary of what happened in the paper. The next paper I would like to summarize is, it's about, let's frame it very simple, about regulation. No, it's much more, of course, but it's just a wake-up call for you. So the Best Paper Award, the qualitative paper is a joint research project of the Nottingham Business School, the Cass Business School, and the University of Nottingham Business School. And Jean-Pascal Gond will present or discuss these findings later. The title is Governing Responsible Business Conduct Through Financial Markets, the Case of French Socially Responsible Investment. So it's a case study about the development in France in the last decades, and we all know that France is something like a blueprint in terms of how to integrate different aspects of socially responsible investment, that France is usually a front runner in responsible investment, but so far we have little empirical research how governments shape CSR behavior within and through financial markets. So this is something that was not in the focus of research to see how governments behave. And they did that in a longitudinal qualitative study. They analyzed the French market over the last 20 years. They used multiple sources, so secondary data, and they run 76 interviews, so a very close cooperation with the market, with the different market players, and we will learn more about the development in France later. You develop 4 modes of governmental regulation: regulatory steering, indirect rowing, micro-steering, and transnationalization. And the idea is, and this is one of the key findings, that the governments, they play a very important role in redefining the boundaries between the private and the public sector. And I think this is especially interesting to see that if we have the discussions right now with the ICHEC, the high-level expert group, on how the development in Europe might develop, how we can use the findings from French as a template of different ways of intervention, also in a way of how could governmental engagement be innovative, how can this trigger processes, and how can we integrate regulation with a strong interaction of private actors that take over responsibility of what is happening and therefore have a higher acceptance of different regulatory frameworks over there. And I think we all agree that France is a really good example for this implementation, especially because in the last 20 years we had different governments in France with different political background. And we can see that even based on these different governmental environments, we have a very stable SRI development. This is something you described in detail in your paper. So, and the last paper I would like to summarize is the Best Paper Award for the quantitative paper. This is a paper of Rainer Brandon and Philip Kruger. It's called The Sustainable Footprint of Institutional Investors. What they did is that they add research to the, you mentioned this one paper we published in cooperation with Gunnar Friede, who is sitting there, and Timo Busch, who is also in the audience. This paper is on the question of the development of sustainable footprint of institutional investors. And what they did, they focused their research on 30F institutional investors. So these have to disclose based on 30F of SEC. And they did different things. They, first of all, used a new way of quantifying the sustainability on a portfolio level. I mean, this is a fact we always have to face. How do you measure sustainability on a portfolio level? What they did is they used the MSCI approach with the SDGs. I think you're all aware of them, where they clustered SDGs to 4 criteria. And so they used that as a measure for the footprint of the portfolio to quantify ESG performance of a portfolio. and they analyzed the behavior of the investors in a long-term and short-term perspective. Of course, we just discussed that it might make a difference if you have a long-term investor or a short-term investor, and what they did in their paper, they analyzed exactly this relation in detail based on this new measure, this new way of quantifying the portfolio level ESG performance. And their findings are very clear. First of all, they found out that there is a certain development of the sustainable footprint, that the sustainable footprint changed. They defined sustainable footprint as the impact of the portfolio. So there is a better performance of the portfolios overall. And after 2010, they found out that the social footprint is quite stable, and there is still an increase in the sustainable footprint within the last year. So a better sustainability impact of the fund and a stable social impact. And they use different theories to explain this behavior. So they do not simply describe the data. They're based on two theories, the overcoming short-termism and the managerial-driven philanthropy. And the interesting thing is that they found out that institutional investors with a higher sustainability footprint, so with better sustainability performance, they tend to have longer-term investment horizons. So those with better sustainability performance have a longer investment horizon. It doesn't matter how you measure the long term of the investment horizon. This is something they generally found out. And what they also found in their research, that this higher sustainability footprint with investors is also linked to a higher risk-adjusted performance of the portfolios. If you just mentioned our paper there, we found about portfolio studies that most of the cases we found a neutral relation, but on their measure, they found a positive relation between the sustainability footprint with this new measure and a better risk-adjusted performance. So, and also on a quarterly and on a yearly basis. So the interesting thing is what drives the financial risk-adjusted financial performance? It's the risk. So what they found out is that these portfolios with a better sustainability footprint, they have a strong reduction in the total portfolio risk. So it's not generally return enhancing, it's more risk reducing, what they found in their paper. So this long-term value is achieved through a lower risk in these portfolios. So I'm very happy that we have these three papers with an award, the quantitative award, the qualitative award, and the student paper award with very different approaches, what you notice. So one with MSCI data, the other the case study, and the third one more theoretical framework. And I think this is very important for the academic research in that field, to have this different perspective, different approaches, because this is something that really drives the market, the academic market. And we will see later when you look at the French award that there are also different approaches possible. So therefore, a great applause to these three awardees.
Thanks very much, Alex. Jean-Philippe, I'm personally very interested to hear if you also have a wake-up call and what that key phrase will be, like Alex, but also learning more about the FIR-PRI Award for Finance and Sustainability. Please share more.
Sure. Thank you, Katherine. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. When I read the program, I've seen that this session was full. So not completely full, but we are more than 200 people in the room, and clearly it's a success that we could not have imagined 10 or 15 years ago. So it's great. But it's normal because we had Hollywood Awards, global awards, and now we're going to move to European awards, so a kind of Bears of Berlin or Festival de Cannes. So it's normal that we have all these people, and thank you. So I'm very pleased to speak as a co-founder of the European Awards that I will present in a very short time, and I will let the floor to our chairwoman this year of the jury, Christel, but also in the name of as a board member of the Friendship, which was at the root of the beginning of this European Awards, and also because I'm very pleased also to be at the Academic Network Committee with Katherine and Alexander. The beginning was in 2003 when Professor Michael Porter visited the Copenhagen Business School with two messages. One was a positive and hot one. He said, Professor Michael Porter, Harvard, I say that CSR, SRI are strategic subjects. It will be very key for the next years, decades. Ooh, that was the positive signal. And then a negative and cold message, no, start doing good academic research on that field because really you need to wake up. So that was the contrast message, and that was the beginning of the reflection that really we need to collaborate more and more academics and practitioners. So now with this European Awards, we are now with the 12th edition. So we promote academic research and dealing with sustainable finance. So of course it means responsible investment, but also different issues such as microfinance, impact investing, and so on. The rules of these awards are quite simple. European students and professors can apply. But in addition, non-European students and professors who work in European universities can also apply. So as a result, for the last 12th edition, we had 82 alumni from 26 different nationalities. So you will not be surprised that we find UK citizens, Dutch, German, French, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, Finnish, and so on, but also Chinese, US, Indian, or Tunisian people. So it's a success for this approach that's having a large diversity. We award five categories: best master PhD for students, best PhD for students also. We also offer a grant to support a PhD. And then we have two specific categories for academics and professors: best article, and also a new one, innovation capacity, for instance, for MOOC. We started with this approach, and very rapidly PRI became an informal stakeholder, and very rapidly in 2010 we had this partnership, and we are very proud to continue on this long-term challenge, because you know that sustainable finance is long-term and academic research is long-term. So here we are for long-term, and I'm very happy that hundreds of people are happy and ready to deal with this long-term approach. A word for the sponsors, because these awards only exist because every year we have 10 loyal sponsors. I will not quote them, but they do represent the finance industry, asset owners, asset manager, providers, and thanks to them we have that. We finance, and this is not for charity or philanthropy. As an investor or practitioner for the last 20 years in this industry, I precise that we do that because we need it for two main reasons. The one is technical reasons. We are happy to use all the human capital of the students and academics and professors to deal with technical issues that we have. But we also, and it has been said with the example of the French market, but we also need academics for legitimacy and institutionalization of the subject. The fact that we have more and more program-specific developments in key academic university is very important. Just to give you an example, at Harvard, 10% of the portfolio managers who are in the industry in the US did Harvard or had an executive course at Harvard. It gives you, on the long term, the potential impact that we can have as practitioners. I'm happy that these awards are today European awards delivered in Berlin, at the heart of Europe, and because we never have to forget that Europe started as soon as in the Middle Age. so 1,000 years ago, when students and academics were visiting different universities, La Sorbonne, Oxford, Bocconi, and so on. So it's also a way to come back to the roots of Europe, and here in Berlin it's important to precise that. We are now in a frontier for all this development between practitioners and academics. In the 1950s, 1960s, perhaps some of you do remember, but we've seen huge improvement for the finance industry because there were strong collaboration between academics and practitioners everywhere, but especially in the US. And now, I will consider that now, with this, in the beginning of this century, we all have to collaborate to do that. We investors, thanks to academics in the 19th century, we learned better how to perform, how to measure the financial performance with modesty. Last century, the 20th century, we learned how to better measure financial risk, here again with modesty, because there are always debates and debates. And now for this present century, we now have to better measure the social and environmental impact of our investment, risk mitigation, investment solution, and so on. And here we know all that we need academics, and that's why I have the pleasure to let the floor to Professor Dumas. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And before naming the awardees of this year's edition, I wanted to give a bit of insight on where academic research is at now, based on the different submissions we had and based on the winning papers. And 4 points I think are worth mentioning. The first one is that looking at this year's submissions to the FIR Award, we can say that sustainability is making progress in terms of breadth of scope. I mean by that there are more topics covered, there are more different issues. But though we're making progress in terms of breadth of scope, we're not making progress yet in terms of change of paradigm, meaning having a more long-term vision. And I'll explain these 2 points. The broad variety of topics that we have is, for example, the fact that we have research on equity, but on debt as well. And that was something we were really looking forward to. We need more research on the debt side. The old topics came up, of course, in the different research, but new frontiers as well. And to name a few, we had research on microfinance, on engagement, on real estate, on controversies, credit scoring, regulation, carbon and water, etc. And that's a really good thing because it broadened the debate, and as a jury we had very interesting conversations on what is sustainable finance and how broad can we go, what topics make sense in this. And so that was a good point. I mentioned the slight regret maybe in the different submissions we have, that we don't have a change in length of horizon in terms of the tools we use to do research or the topics that we research. And we're still very much in that shareholder maximization pursuit in terms of research as well. There is an exception though, that's the 2 PhDs that we received and that are going to be awarded today who really move away from this paradigm, and that's something that we appreciated in both of these works, but I'll talk more about those after. Second point to mention is the new methods, and you mentioned them. We have a lot of old questions, but that we're trying to address with new methods which lead to new insights. And that's really a call to continue in terms of research, to find new methods to help us answer the questions that we're trying to deal with. Third point is the really good contribution to industry. Chairing this jury, I thought we would have a real separation between what the academics, who represent half of the jury, appreciated in the papers and what the practitioners appreciated in the papers. And it was really interesting to see that there was no real divide in terms of what academics and practitioners were looking for. And on the contrary, the academics in the jury saw valuable insight and useful information in most or all of the submissions that we have. For example, one of the prizes goes to a massive online open course, a MOOC, And as well, the practitioners as the academics said, this is definitely something I want to recommend to my colleagues or to my students, and I think it can promote the understanding of the subject. Again, more on that later. Fourth and last point is the fact that reading all these papers made me acknowledge the fact that finance and sustainability can really reinforce each other. And they can contribute to each other. They don't have to be in opposition or in different worlds. And so for that, I'm really grateful that I had the chance to chair this jury this year, because it was uplifting. It was very inspiring to read all these papers and give me a sense of purpose in the research I do and we all do in sustainable finance. It helps us, reading all these papers, help us not lose insight of what we're doing this research for, what drives us, and that's how best to use capital to benefit our future, the long-term future of the planet, etc. And I think all research contributed in one way or the other to this bigger purpose that we should not lose sight of. So the jury deliberated twice, a first round where we selected 3 papers per category, and then a second round. All jury members read all the papers, because in addition to the selection process, what's really interesting is the debates that we can have around these papers among jury members. And so for that, we're happy to be able to read all the papers. After the selection, we realized, and we were happy about that we happen to have perfect gender diversity. Half of the winners are males, half of the women are females. I don't know if we would have managed to do that if we had tried for it. And again, a great diversity in terms of nationalities. We have Spaniards, we have French people living in Belgium, Germans living in the UK, living in the Netherlands. We also have Bulgarians living in Denmark, which is specific enough that I think she'll recognize herself. So moving on to the awards now and to the winners. For Best Published Article, we decided to reward a paper that really interested the practitioners because it proposed a model for credit scoring. And it's an academic paper, but that comes up with a very specific model. The model was intended for cooperatives and for social banks, and to help them do their credit scoring. But it can really be helpful for any institutional investor, because you can adapt the model based on what's important for you and what factors you want to put forth or not. And so this award goes to Begonia Gutierrez Nieto and her co-authors, Carlos Serrano Cinca and Juan Camon Cala from the University of Saragossa, for their article, A Credit Scoring System for Socially Responsible Lending, published in the Journal of Business Ethics. The best master thesis goes to a student who applied a new method to an old question, which is something we really appreciate because we think we need these new research methods. And she took advantage of the passing of a new law to apply a new method, leading to new insight. It was very comprehensive work with a robust methodology, and although it was a master student, we thought it had an academic level in terms of its work. She shows the causal link between improved access to finance, how much finance a company has, and the CSR of this company. And she helps us understand if and when financial constraints matter in the CSR behavior of a company. So this Best Master Thesis Award goes to Vanya Rusinova from Copenhagen Business School for her master thesis, Access to Finance and Corporate Social Responsibility, Evidence from a Quasi-Natural Experiment under the supervision of Georg Wernicke. Next, the Best PhD Thesis. And exceptionally this year, the jury decided to award prizes to 2 PhD theses, which both obtained the same number of votes in the 2 rounds of votes. And in no particular order, one of this PhD thesis addresses or at least was awarded because he really broadened the debate on finance. He brought concepts of the commons, which he applied to microfinance. It was a very original approach, and here we're really finally moving away from the stakeholder maximization paradigm to explore new solutions. It was a very intellectually stimulating thesis as well, and he explained or proposed how collective action can really shape new meaning in finance to make it more democratic or contribute to public interest, which is one of the roles of finance as well. So one of the PhD awards goes to Camille Meyer from l'Université Libre de Bruxelles for his PhD thesis, Social Finance and the Commons, under the supervision of Marek Hudon. The other PhD award goes to a very different piece of work and just as interesting. It's a thesis that helps us redefine maybe ethics in finance, and that links the issues of finance and materiality. She addresses the key issues of regulation and very strategically relevant issues for practitioners to understand what the impact of regulation can be. She also explains why institutional investors engage in ESG and focuses, maybe what we haven't seen enough in other works, on the beneficiaries. So what are the implications for beneficiaries of this ESG engagement? So the PhD thesis award goes to Lisa Skopol from Henley Business School for her PhD thesis, Essays on Institutional Investment and Socially Responsible Investing, under the supervision of Andreas Hupner. Now, the best pedagogical innovation went this year to a MOOC, a massive online open course, and this MOOC addresses impact investing, the finance that changes the world. And you can find it on internet if you just type the finance that changes the world, impact investing. It was developed by Thierry Sibiud and by ICHEC. And what's really interesting in this MOOC is that it was created with the students. So the student proposed what should be in the MOOC. The industry side is a real contribution. It's something you would want your colleagues to watch to make them understand what impact investing is. And the professors on the jury also felt like this is a MOOC that they would want their students to watch. Having a MOOC like that really signals, or is a good signal to support the expansion of impact investing, to support its understanding. And we thought we needed more of this type of media in the future to promote sustainable finance in its different forms. Unfortunately, Thierry Sibiud is not here today. Which brings us to the last category, the research grant. And the research grant goes to a study that shows the link between the environment and productivity. It's business case thinking, so a typical question that we've been trying to address so far, but it shows that there's a causal relationship between, or it's going to show, hopefully, that there's that there's going to be a causal relationship between rising temperature and returns of a company. Right? What are the damages that global warming can have for a firm's productivity, and how could we put numbers for that? And so the practitioners in the jury thought that this was definitely a relevant question and would help their discussions with clients and with others, wanted to support this research, and so attribute the research grant to Nora Pankras from Maastricht University for her PhD project, Productivity Loss from Heat and Stock Return in Europe, under the supervision of Rob Bauer and Jeroen de Waal.
Thanks very much, Christel. Can I ask the awardees to come forward now for the question and answer session? We've got about 10 minutes for that. You can take your place here. And people with the microphones, can we get one to the front, please?
We have perhaps to move away or
Those of you in the audience, if you have a question, can you raise your hand and tell us who you are and the research that you would like directed?
documents in order that the participant can have
I mean, I'll have my questions and just take over if no one wants to come forward just yet. Ah, Martin, thank you very much. Do we have a mic?
Well, first, congratulations to all of you. So it's really been exciting to hear about this research. I was actually very interested in this topic of the master thesis, which is around financial constraints, I guess, and ESG performance. And maybe two. One is, how did you develop a hypothesis around this? And what do you think are the what would you think would be the takeaways for a practitioner looking at an analyst, looking at a company and trying to understand ESG performance in light of these financial constraints? And congratulations on the prize.
Thank you very much for the question. In terms of developing the hypothesis, the kind of beginning point of the study was to examine where there is a causal link between improved access to finance and corporate social responsibility. And that is very crucial because we cannot make decisions if we don't know what is the direction of causality, what affects what, basically. And so it was an interesting idea to explore on the empirical setting that we had in hand, which was a passage of a tax law in the United States, provided a perfect venue for it, if I may say. And so the idea that we looked at would be that there would be a difference. We expected to see a difference between firm behavior between firms that were financially constrained versus those that were unconstrained, with the expectation that unconstrained firms would probably not really change anything about their CSR investments, as if they're already unconstrained, there should be no changes there. They're already expected to be at an optimum. While for the constrained firms, we expected a slightly different behavior, as if we relate to signaling theory, for example, where financially constrained firms would invest in CSR to send a signal to the market and investors that they're a good quality firm, then once they have this cash windfall on their hands, they may no longer need to incur the expensive cost that investments in CSR may represent. So in terms of applications, I think first and foremost, that is the causal link. As I mentioned, it's quite crucial that we establish the direction. And then also it is important to note that there is an asymmetric outcome in the behavior of firms depending on that level of financial constraints. And when it comes, for example, to developing further policies for improving access to finance, then we really need to take that into consideration, that there may be an adverse effect on a certain outcome. In this case, it was CSR.
Any other questions? I have a question for Jean-Pascal. Your research looked at France and did a very in-depth case study looking over the past 20 years. I understand that France, it has a unique experience, but how can other European countries learn from France, and which countries would they be? What were the learnings? Can you share?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Actually, what we are trying to understand in this paper is not only the case of France, it's more how governmental regulation is getting completely transformed, not necessarily to our kind of neoliberal regulation where you just let financial markets do everything, or to the old-fashioned way of regulating, explaining private actors what you have to do. And what we think is that in the French context, what has happened over the last 20 years is really the reinvention of new form of government regulations that are simultaneously very stringent and that are create a very strong buy-in from private actors. And we think that the development of labels in particular, and the fact that, in a sense, the French government has taken over the process of label development that was at the beginning a private initiatives, in a sense, it's quite interesting of this new way of trying to regulate indirectly different entities. So what I think we can learn, and what other countries or regulators from other countries can learn, is really trying to think about more hybrid forms of regulations that are really between the dominant standards form of regulation we have observed before. And I think it will matter not only at the French level, but also at the European level and at the transnational level, because we think that these new ways of regulating through labels, for instance, seem to be of interest for a lot of people in the higher level expert group, for instance, of the European Commission. So we think that this way of regulating differently is relevant not only for a national government, but also for transnationalizing, if you like, responsible investing at a European level, or even, why not, in the future at a global level. So I think it could become relevant for many different jurisdictions beyond the French border. But the message is really there is maybe in this French, I mean, we can look at France as a kind of experimental context within which new form of regulation are experimented, and we think they could be of use in different places and across different levels of regulation.
Thank you. We have a question here at the front. A mic's coming to you.
First of all, congratulations to all of you, especially to Nora, who's going to show you it's way too hot here to have a fruitful discussion with her study. But I have a question for Philip. So, I don't know how many asset managers are in the room, but you know, if you have low risk, you expect lower returns. You probably agree with that. Yeah. So if we all know that this relationship exists, doesn't the asset management industry need a new framework to actually calculate and transparently show these risks to their clients? And how does your study, who also looks at risk-adjusted returns, actually contribute to that thinking? Can you brainstorm with the people in this room that manage our assets?
Well, that's a very deep question. So maybe I'll just say a couple of things about, the first thing you said about this relationship between risk and return. It very much depends on which kind of risk you're looking at, right? I mean, if you look at market risk, then you get like a positive relationship between risk and return. Now, to come to my study, so I don't know, unfortunately I was late because my flight was delayed, so I don't really know what has been said about my or our study, so
never know now.
I might just try to, present you the punchline. So essentially what we do is we look at sort of what we call the sustainability footprint, which is evaluated average sustainability at the portfolio level. And then what we show is that correlates quite strongly negatively with different measures of risk, and in particular with with measures like idiosyncratic risk. I think that's something that's been known to practitioners, I think, since a while already. But obviously it bears the question. But what we do not find is a positive link between our measure of sustainability and returns. And I think I think what an interesting aspect we highlight is in this study that there's been a lot of research on this relationship between, let's say, ESG and returns, with positive, negative, no returns. But I think the actual much stronger relationship there is actually that with respect to risk, right? So I think that's a very, very, very strong relationship. So I don't really know if I answered your question in terms of whether there should be a paradigm shift in terms of calculating risk. I guess we calculate the risk the way we do these days because of historical developments, and I think it's maybe the best measures we have at the moment. But I think it definitely makes sense thinking about other ways of quantifying risk, in particular in terms of sort of longer term risk that might not be captured by sort of the standard measures of risk. So I don't know, hope that.
Well, I saw a question down there at the back.
It was more a reaction, just a quick reaction on the French regulation and how innovative it was and mostly inspiring for other countries. I just wanted to living in France, just wanted to mention that I think that including corporates is great, but maybe including civil society into discussions would be meaningful too. So just wanted to add that as we are talking about responsible investments, they have a word to say and have now very mature bodies through non-profits, very highly professional people who can certainly feed the discussion at this standard.
I know that was a comment, but there's anyone at the front that would like to, if not respond, then share a reaction to that.
I really agree with that, and the fact, but I think that the fact the government is there can really help civil society organization making their voice heard, in a sense. And we should also keep in mind the fact that governments are elected, which is not the case of many institutional investors. So they have the democratic legitimacy that is, according to Milton Friedman and others, missing so much to a lot of private actors. So that could be one way of reconciliating that issue, and that could give new channels for civil society organizations to lobby and have their voice heard in the process of responsible investing. So there is potential, but this was not the main point of our punchline of our paper, but there is really potential to explore this.
We have time for one question. Of course. One from each side.
Yes, congratulations to everybody. I had a question about the proxy voting and retail investors. And I was just curious, with the change from the 70s to now, with the access to different investment vehicles, especially mutual funds, what impact would that have on the actual voting, since so much would have been given to the managers of the funds?
Thanks for the question. You ask a very good question. And in my paper, I just looked at direct shareholdings. But mutual funds can vote on behalf of and should. But it's a mixed bag. And if you look for responsible voting, you can find it in some mutual funds. You can find non-ESG types of voting in some mutual funds, and you find a lot that don't vote at all. And ETFs are similar as well. They vote far less than, say, a pension manager would, even though they've got kind of the same big funds and resources to do it. So I really just looked at the impact on the individual that holds shares directly in my study.
And over here at the front, please.
Hi, and good day. Congratulations to all of you. I'm Portia from South Africa, Eskom Pension and Provident Fund. I just wanted to find out from one of you, the person who developed the credit scoring model for social impacting investing. I don't know who amongst you it is. Okay, no, I just wanted to find out in terms of how relevant is your findings for an emerging market pension fund that would like to go into real asset investing, which is obviously lending in within the infrastructure investment, like the health, education, and so forth. I mean, how relevant is your model for pension funds within the emerging market space, and what are some of the conclusions and the findings, on your model? What are some of the, touching points that you focused on? Because my question comes from the fact that we would, as a pension fund, would like to develop internally an independent credit scoring model for real assets investment. So I just wanted to find out how relevant will it be for investors like ourselves. Thank you.
Okay. Well, the model was tested for a real investor with a real credit application. We developed 3 different models for 3 different kind of socially responsible investors. So this model can be easily adapted to any kind of investor with a social aim. And the model not only produces a score as a mathematical result for each credit application, but also produces a balanced scorecard reflecting the strengths and weaknesses of the credit application. So, well, maybe we also tested it for a microfinance institution in America. So maybe it can be easily replicated in your context, in your country. Thank you.
If there are more questions, I'd like to say that the awardees will be available at the first networking break at the PRI stand tomorrow. And two final comments from me. Before I do that, I'd like to take this chance to thank the panel and our awardees. Thank you very much. Okay, a word of thanks to our sponsors of the Academic Network Conference, Union Investment. We couldn't do and put this on without you, so thank you very much.